All right, so the last part of our conversations on how to actually procure employment. So after today, we'll be kind of pivoting into how to work for yourself, which will be part of our how to talk about like setting up like sales for a session and setting up packages and things like that. But today we're still discussing like you wrote your cover letter and your resume, and both those went out, and now you get the awesome interview actually set up, right? Like they liked your resume, they liked your cover letter. Now they're going to consider giving you the gig, and you got to go in there and interview better than anybody else. So um, first we'll get our little definition up here. So interview is going to be the means by which a candidate actually gets the job, right? So it facilitates the exchange of information, bring J in here, of job to the job between the employer and candidate. So this is your chance to kind of like, this is a chance for the interviewer not only to like ask you questions that are directly related to the job so that they can determine if they want to hire you. It's also an opportunity for you and them to have a discussion about this potential job, right? Like what your duties are going to be, like what is expected of you, but also things like, what are they looking for in like an ideal candidate, and do you think that you're a good match for that? And that's kind of one of the key things to like knocking out these interviews successfully is like, kind of taking control of the interview in a way. I mean, obviously you don't want to just like talk over the person who's interviewing you and not have an actual conversation. But like, a lot of times people go into interviews really nervous because they think that they're going to have to answer a lot of questions on the fly, and they don't know how they're going to do on stuff like that. The big thing that you need to remember is that this person wants to hire you. I mean, to be fair, they want to hire literally everybody that they are interviewing. They just want this process to be over with. Like as brutal as interviewing is and like job hunting is for the job hunter, the employer's like interviewing is the worst. Because like there's a manager who probably has like a lot of normal duties throughout their day, and they can't do any of those things because they have to set up these 30-minute things that just suck up a big portion of their day. They want to hire you and get this over with, and like have like a potential new awesome employee that's gonna make their life easier. So like the ball is really in your court. It's not something that you need to be quite as nervous about as a lot of people think. So that's something to always kind of keep in mind as you're going through this process. But it provides a chance for them to kind of ask you direct questions about the things on your resume or in your cover letter or on your application. And so they can assess like, how does your knowledge, how do your skills match up with like this potential job, right? And then it's an opportunity for you to kind of learn a little bit about like your interviewer. You do want to make sure that like in the same way that you want to be like likable in your interview, because like one other thing that you got to remember that they are considering, they're not only considering like how effective you're going to be at the job, they're also probably considering like, hey, I've got to be around this person for maybe 8 hours a day. Like, do I want to work with them? And that's something for you to consider as well. So first thing, obviously, you want to bring in your resume. So when we're talking about writing a resume, there's just a quick little review here. Most effective resumes focus on like a specific job title. So like you're going to call yourself a personal trainer or group exercise instructor, or maybe you're applying for a general manager position. And that's the thing, by the way, like, it's not always about like just working directly as like a trainer. There's a lot of things within that your personal training experience can lend you to that are not just like directly working with clients. I know a lot of students like who have graduated from Sochi, they really haven't even had that much experience working one-on-one with clients. And within their first year, they find themselves like working in like the sales management at like a gym and they don't train clients anymore. They're just there to like sell memberships because they found out they were great at sales and that's like what they wanted, and that's what they ended up like actually focusing on in the end. So there is stuff like that as well. If you find that you have like a specific type of strength, that's the kind of thing you want to put your emphasis on your resume. And then that also lets you, kind of cater yourself specific to like anything that's listed on a specific, job notice board or anything like that, when you're applying. So always have a clear objective, list your education, list your experience. You guys know this. Put your references separately. If you do have references, the one thing we don't really like have a day on or an example of is like creating like a references sheet. But this is another thing that you can find online that has like templates. Like for instance, if I go just new here, if I'm on Microsoft Word, I'm on new and I go reference sheet. And normally references at this point, they're such a common thing that shows up as part of the job hunting process that most of the time they are part of the application. So you don't necessarily need to put them on your resume anymore. But let's just say you want a reference sheet. You can find any one of these kind of classic examples templates, and literally you would just enter like your reference's name. So like if I was just like Bob Smith, title, let's just say he was the general manager at, we'll say, Gold's Gym. That is not, there we go. And then I put the address and phone number. And then I would just really basically like put my, relationship, right? He was my general manager for 7 years, and that's like our relationship. And then my name and stuff goes at the top here. I'd probably format all this to look similar to my resume so that there's some consistency there. Also, 5 references is kind of overdoing it. Usually most people do 3 to 4. So that is a references sheet. You can include that when you come in for your interview. But again, like I said, nowadays, that's a little outdated. You're not seeing that quite as commonly. A lot of times they're putting that on applications nowadays. The other thing, by the way, about references, here's the big advantage to making a reference sheet, though, if you do decide to make one, is that you can use it for yourself in the future. You maybe have like a digital copy saved on your phone so that when you go in for those applications and you're like, crap, what was the address where I used to work? Or what was the freaking phone number for Bob? Like that stuff is often something you don't have memorized. The faster you can like pull that up and get it on your application, the better. So it's not that I don't recommend making a reference sheet. I do recommend making one, but I will say like turning in a physical one is a little outdated nowadays. I think some places still ask for it. Definitely, certainly places that are more traditional. But the gym environment, like the fitness environment, is not very traditional. And we are out here in California, which is incredibly non-traditional, which is some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Like I've talked a little bit about how like we've got West Coast casual going on. Today we're going to definitely see those differences. So list your references separately. Don't use your family for references. You can use friends, but make sure that like if you do only like 1 or 2 personal preferences at the very, very most. Most of your references you want to have are professional ones. So when you're preparing for the interview, right, it's important to make sure that you know exactly like what the time, what the date is for your interview. If you're traveling for that interview, you want to make sure that you have your travel and lodging arranged, and like how far away from the place that you're staying is, how to get in there. Are you going to take an Uber? Are you going to take a taxi? How are you going to get into town? Like things like that. But in general, for like your regular interview, make sure that you have all of that time carved out and that you can be there, prepared for that interview, right? Like you don't like if you don't have a printer, which, most people don't nowadays, you got to make sure that like you go to Kinko's the day before and get that thing printed out. Like don't do any of that day of. just because something can go wrong, and then all of a sudden you've got 20 minutes to get, halfway across the city, right? So in most candidates, or most cases, like if you are interviewing outside of town or something, lodging and stuff like that is going to be provided for you. They'll arrange travel and stuff, but a lot of times like they'll have some way of like reimbursing you if you get the job. But for the most part, that's like if you're actually traveling. So most people not going to do too much of that. So here's our sort of our general preparation for the interview here. So preparing. I lost my bullet point. Here we go. Preparing for the interview. First thing you want to do is research the agency. So, like I said, I told you guys like my favorite method for doing this. I like to call on somebody else's phone and just bug them and learn everything I can about that company. And then I don't want them to know that it was me that was bugging them. But that way, like I can come in and I know exactly what to talk about. I know exactly, what their focus is, and I can drop a few of those key phrases like during my interview. So before you engage in an interview, make sure that you research your organization. So researching the organization before your interview will lead to increased knowledge and an ability to cater yourself specifically to the job. Right? So the more you know about it, the easier it's going to be for you to talk about like why you are such a good candidate for it, right? So if it's possible, it's always wise for you to know a little bit about the people who are interviewing you as well. Know a little bit about the people who are hiring you. If you can figure out the name of the general manager and you can learn a little bit about them, like what their background in fitness is, that can be really helpful. For instance, like my friend Rebecca, she didn't even do this on purpose. She wasn't even giving me tips, but when she got me the interview for when we both worked at the resort together, I remembered she had mentioned that the general manager, who was the person who was like conducting my interview and was my boss in the end, was like really big into spinning. And so like at one point, like I mentioned how I was training for like a triathlon in my interview. I just knew that like that was something she liked, spinning. And so I was like, yeah, I did like a little, like an X mile bike ride the other day, just getting ready for my triathlon. She's like, oh, you like spinning? And I was like, I haven't done a lot of spinning. And I didn't lie. Don't do that. We'll talk about that in just a second. Never lie in your interview. But I was like, I don't do a lot of like spinning, but I do like riding, I do like riding a physical like bike and stuff, and mountain biking here and there. And she was like, oh, that's really cool. And that struck up a conversation where she was like, one of our hiking guides like mountain biking. And I was like, oh, okay. And, so that like led to an opportunity for like just a conversation starter, I don't know why I remember that in particular. I actually remember my interview really well. I also went in there. I knew that I wanted this job, but at the same time, like I'm always a little hesitant of like group exercise stuff. I'm not much of, I like energy and I like high volume, but I do not believe in like negative reinforcement, yelling at people. That's just not the type of trainer that I am. So I remember bringing that up in my interview and being like, they're like, so tell us about your training style. And I was like, well, if you're looking for somebody who's going to like scream in the faces of their people as a means of motivation, that's definitely not who I am. So maybe I'm not the best candidate. And that right there, I remember talking to my other manager like years later, And he was like, oh yeah, you were a weird hire. Like we were super intrigued because like you took a lot of control over the interview. Uh, and like we wanted to know more about you. And that's what led to my second interview. But they were like, but like it was definitely like kind of a weird conversation because it felt like you were interviewing us. And it was so intriguing, we had to bring you back for a second one. I was like, hell yeah, like that's what I was going for. But that's mostly because like I don't like being out of control. So it is okay to like do some schmoozing and stuff. If but I will say, I mean, like weird, that doesn't necessarily mean it was the greatest interview in the world. But it's definitely something that I made a conscious choice in. That's what you can do as well. Like if you do your research and you know what you want to talk about going in, that gives you a sense of control, which is going to give you a sense of confidence. Because that's, I think, the biggest thing that people who are listening to this, people who are watching right now, I think that's the biggest thing we're all worried about, right? Is like having to answer stuff on the fly and like losing that sense of control. That's what makes people nervous during interviews. So if you can do a little bit of research, you know a little bit about the people who are interviewing you, and they aren't 100% a stranger because you just know a little bit about them, and you can maybe use that to kind of find common ground. It'll give you a sense of control, which will give you confidence, which will be a better interview. So one other thing you're definitely going to want to do beforehand is do a self-assessment. And that's exactly kind of what I was just talking about. Do an assessment of like, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Because, we're all going to get that crap question. Again, we're going to see this in a little bit too. We're all going to get that crap question that every interviewer loves to ask, where they're like, what are your greatest strengths? And then you answer and they go, what are your greatest weaknesses? Like that greatest weaknesses thing is such a silly standard interview question. I'm proud to say I've never asked that dumb question personally in the times that I've conducted job interviews. The thing about it is, it's like I mean I get it, like they're looking for self-awareness, like they're trying to show self-awareness, but there's just so many better ways to like word that and like lead a person in, because the reason that question is kind of silly is because obviously you are aware of like what it is you struggle with, right? We're all aware of like our what we're really good at, and we're aware of like maybe what we're not so good at. But how do you are there to kind of highlight your skills that are going to lend to this job. Some of your weakness, like you might be applying for a job that you are perfect for. And sometimes like it's hard to figure out like what your weaknesses are if they're not relevant to that job. Like we all think about like what skills are relevant to that job. We don't spend time thinking about how our downfalls are relevant to like what we're applying for. If our downfalls are relevant to what we're applying for, we're probably not going to apply for it. And that's why that question's like silly in my opinion. It's like, what are your weaknesses? I don't know. I'm afraid of bees. It's not relevant to this conversation. Moving on, like, and obviously like, I'm aware that like one of my biggest weaknesses is sometimes like I'm too much of a talker, and I tend to like burn a little bit of free time and get distracted. That's something that can definitely happen, but like I don't let that affect like my ability to do my job as a personal trainer. Like session's over, you're out the door and I'm on to the next one. So when you're answering that like question, that's kind of an example of like what you want to do. It's like, yeah, this is something that like I struggle with, but just so you're aware, I'm aware of it and I don't let it affect my professional life. So perform a self-assessment so you know what to answer when you get to questions like that. Figure out what are your greatest strengths. Figure out what are your greatest weaknesses, because everybody loves that dumb question. So it is essential to take a realistic self-assessment in terms of skills, abilities, knowledge, experience, strengths, and weaknesses, right? I mean, a lot of people in this class are going to be new to the fitness industry. Like the best thing you guys can do is pretty much most people in here use the same like greatest weakness answer, which is basically, you know what, I'm very aware of the fact that I am new to this industry, but like I have had a lot of practice in school. I've been thinking about becoming a personal trainer for a long time now. I've had plenty of time to mentally prepare for this, and I'm going to kick butt once I get out there. There you go. Weakness addressed, you know? And I think that all is, you know, I'm putting words into your mouth for you, but I think all that's true. 99, no, more than almost all the students I know, you know, are a little nervous going out there. But like I've worked with you guys and I know that you're like capable. And so now you just got to convince yourself that you're capable, you know? So perform that self-assessment so you can become aware of like all the great stuff that you know how to do. And that'll help you have like help the candidate have a greater awareness of what you can offer to your potential employer. You know, like what is the stuff while you were in school that you absolutely nailed? You were like, you know what, I latched onto that assessment stuff like that. I know that I've got really good strengths when it comes to assessing clients, especially because like while I was at school, I was doing it on people who, you know how to squat. And I'm still able to find like what their big struggles are. And my teacher has a posterior pelvic tilt that he could never stop talking about. So I'm really good with that postural distortion. So that's a big one that you're going to do before you go to your interview. Make sure you do a self-assessment. Get aware of like what it is that you struggle with and what it is that you're awesome at. And then also practice. Do a little bit of practice for your interview. Practice with friends or family, right? A little bit of like rehearsal can help with your interview, you know? Mostly the biggest thing, and you can see we've got it written right here. The biggest thing that it can do is it can help you fine tune your body language. The biggest mistake most people make, because it can become like a default setting with interviewing, is having like a closed off posture. That little bit of body language, and you know, like, it's funny, like I'm talking about this right now. I'm talking about like how closed off posture affects us and another individual's like perception of you, you know? Like this seems very guarded, and so it seems like you don't want to have a conversation, so it makes it harder for the other person. We pick up on these like subtle cues. So clearly if I'm talking about this, and I've talked about this before, I'm aware of it, right? I'm aware of the fact that like this might not be somebody making a conscious choice, right? They may just like, I know that I stand like this a lot. Like this is my favorite comfortable position, you know? Like I love standing like this. So I am also aware of the fact that people stand like that, not because they are purposely trying to be closed off, but because it is their kind of default setting. Awareness. Yet, in the times that I've interviewed somebody, I will definitely like notice myself zoning out, and I'll stop listening to someone, or I'll think that they are not interested. And then I have literally noticed where I'm like, wait a minute. And then I take a conscious thought of their posture. And I was like, son of a stitch, I fell for basic human psychology. I got turned off to this person because of their closed off posture. Then I take a second, I'm like, that's probably not something they're doing consciously. They're probably just not super solid at like fine tuning their body language. I need to rezone back in. And then I'm like, holy crap, I just thought about all that while this person was talking. What did they say? You know, like it's something that like happens naturally to all of us. Like it's something that in the back of our brains, you know, pre-programmed in our instincts, in our genes, like we have like this body language that we pick up on that we aren't always aware of, you know? And even with a little bit of like conscious like knowledge of it, you still fall prey to that kind of stuff, you know? Weird example of that. This is totally unrelated. You ever want to make somebody stop talking and make them uncomfortable? Stare a couple inches above their eyes, right on their forehead. Something about it makes people immediately go, and then they want to stop talking. So don't do that during your interview. But that's a weird psychology trick that you can try. For those of you who are quarantined with family, give that a shot and see how effective it is. I use that when I'm talking to people I don't like. So practice with your friends and family, right? that's definitely something you want to do. It can give you a chance to kind of review any anticipate questions. So practice anticipating questions. So like if you're applying for a, figure out like what your answer is going to be to that "what's your greatest weakness" question. Have your parents, have your friends, have your roommates, have somebody ask you those questions so you can get used to answering them. Rehearse your answers. And then fine tune your body language and non-verbal cues, right? That is the wrong type of cues. What am I doing with my life? Cues. So fine tune your body language. Just get used to being open to people, and maybe not the anatomic position, you don't have to walk in like a robot or anything, but just try to keep your arms at your sides, and eyes focused on the person that's asking you questions. Making eye contact is huge. So those are all things that you can do to prepare for your interview, right? Research the agency. I'm gonna go back to research the agency really quick and add a couple little things. Know what your commute is. Actually, also know a bit about the parking situation. These are both very LA things. These are not in the PowerPoint, but these are both things that I think you should definitely be aware of that I've goofed up with experience. I don't know what my problem is in life. I've lived here for 10 or 11 years at this point. I should know how freaking parking validation works sometimes. But at the same time, I goof that up constantly. So know what your commute's going to be. Know a little bit about the parking situation. Like, how do you get in there? How do you get directly to where you're going so you can show up on time? All right, big deal. By the way, we've done, it's been a really long time actually, especially thanks to this freaking pandemic thing. But normally we do a lot of like people where we bring people from 24-hour fitness, and we bring managers from Crunch and stuff, and they do a little bit of scouting and tell you guys, they're just guest speakers. We have a pre-existing relationship with Equinox for sure. Equinox, yeah, I mean they do. I guess they do solo talks as well. But we have a really good relationship with like them, Crunch, and 24-hour fitness, and they come to our classes all the time and like stand up at the front. They just tell you guys information. Inevitably, all three of them. And I'll bet somebody in this call is going to forget me saying this, and then you're going to ask this question too, because it comes up every time. Somebody's going to do it. Somebody always asks, well, what's the biggest mistake? Like, what's the number one thing you guys look for in an interview? What's the best thing a candidate can do that makes you guys happy? And you know what's hilarious? The answer from all of them, the answer from Equinox, the answer from the people from Crunch, the answer from 24, all of them say, show up on time. That's the biggest thing they look for every time. I've heard it. Been working at Searching for years now. I've heard it a million times. And it sounds crazy, but it's like, I mean, obviously you should show up on time. It's the time you're supposed to show up. But like, that's the biggest mistake people make, is they just don't show up on time, and it kills their chances instantly. So I'm saying it right now. I'm saying I'm part of the problem. I'm saying the same boring thing that everybody says when they talk about interviews, but I promise you, the reason we all say it is because it is the most important thing. So know what your commute's going to be so that you don't show up late. Know what the parking situation is so that you don't show up late. All right. Don't show up late. Did I say don't show up late? Okay. All right. Oh, God. Nope. Go back. There we go. Oh, God. That's all. Oh, my God. I'm going to go crazy with this. Why are you doing this to me? There we go. All right. Next bit, planning on what to wear. What to wear to an interview. So I'm going to contradict the slides here a little bit. I'm going to contradict this ever so slightly. because again, remember these PowerPoints are kind of from this like specific textbook that is like the recreation industry. So for men, it's going to say a suit. That is not accurate. If you go in wearing a full suit, I mean, it might go well for you, you know, like they might be impressed and be like, wow, this person takes this really seriously. But at the same time, like it's a gym environment, it's LA, and those things are really just out of place here. You're much better off going in wearing like business casual. So if we're looking at examples of that, we are definitely not talking about like jeans. We are talking about like slacks, right? So actually, yeah, here's a really good example, right? You know, shirt not tucked in, don't do that. Yeah, messy hair. I mean, again, it's LA. So like messy hair is actually a style out here. You can get away with that. But generally the best things you can do, here's two really good examples, right? That is a cheesy photo. But nice dress shoes, slacks, right? A belt, and a button-down shirt. You can choose to do it with or without a tie. I think that it can go both ways, actually. Again, because LA is so casual compared to like a lot of other places, you can get away without a tie. I haven't worn a tie to an interview since I was like 18. I haven't done a tie out here in California. I think that's very much like I think it's a West Coast thing, right? That for us is dressed up, you know? So there's definitely, and I've talked about this with, you know, employers out here in the past and, you know, career services and stuff. Like we've had conversations about this, but you are much better off overdoing it than you are underdoing it. So if you do want to wear a tie, that's definitely not going to be a drawback. That can only enhance your chances. So for men, that's what we're talking about. For women, similar situations. Slacks are always a really good choice with just a classic like normal blouse that's like a button down with like closed-toed shoes. Hair generally pulled back, I guess, is what I've heard from most people. But I guess that's just, I don't know, a little more like conservative looking. I cannot imagine that being like a rule. The one thing that I do know that's like specific to women that has nothing to do with the dress, but everything to do with the general presentation, don't go super crazy on the perfume or makeup. Apparently that drives employers nuts. Obviously, I'm not going to have as good a perspective on what to wear as like a female, but like I do know that like, and that goes for guys. I guess and that does go for guys too. Like if you are doing like cologne or something, please don't go crazy on that stuff. You know, walk in there and it's like, whoa, Drakkar Noir. You know, like too much perfume, too much that's too much cologne, like that kind of stuff can really, you know, kill your chances. So in general, the rules that I know that they're looking for: closed-toed shoes, slacks or like below knee length skirt, and then just a classic like button-down blouse, or like V-neck pullover, like that kind of stuff works. So let's go ahead and we'll do the slides here real quick, and then we'll put the list of our normal stuff here. So basically business casual, that's what you're looking for out here in LA, with leaning towards the side of a little, you know, more professional. So for men, dress shoes. Oh yeah, and with those dress shoes, another classic mistake. This is mostly for my young folks in the call here. With your dress shoes, do not wear white socks. Oh my God. I swear it's like, there's just like it's like a level up that happens. Like you turn 22 and finally you learn the lesson. But for those of you who are under, don't wear white socks with your dress shoes. Wear matching colored socks. Good Lord.
On my behalf, I'm safe. I don't even own a pair of white socks.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So I'm in the clear.
Yeah, man. There, I was that. I was totally that person too. Like I got called out on it. Actually, I was lucky enough to get hired, but like later, my boss gave me crap, and he was like, "I remember you were wearing white socks with your black dress shoes," and I was like, "Is that bad?" And he was
That's
like, "Yes,
hilarious.
that's bad."
That's funny.
um, I'm sure, like, if my mom ever, like, my mom's like mom sense is tingling like right now, and she's like, "Well, I told you to." Yeah, well, I didn't listen. So wear dress socks, like dark and matching in color. You can go with brown or black shoes, doesn't matter. Also match your belt to that color. That's a thing. Um, wear a belt. Well, actually, we're working our way from the bottom top. So slacks or dress pants or suit pants rather. Um, Matching belt to go with the whole ensemble, and then a button-down shirt, and then we'll put an asterisk where it tie is optional, right? Nice hair, shaved, you know, avoid too much cologne, right? So those are the general tips for like what to wear during your interview, right? Dress shoes, dress socks, slacks, a matching belt to go with your shoes, button-down shirt, a tie, a nice hair, shaved face, and then don't go crazy on all that cologne, right? For women, and then actually for men and women both, solid colors. That was like the next step. Like, I'm trying to remember back. I'm trying to think really hard about like the interviews I've gone on, and then like the 18-year-old version of me versus like the version of me now that knows, older and wiser. But like, I definitely know that like, yeah, I have white socks with like, big bulky dress shoes that didn't really even fit me. I did wear slacks because I knew that was a thing, and I wore like a button-down shirt, but I know that like it had like a pattern on it because those are the only types of shirts that I had when I was like 18. And then I still had that same problem, like pinstripes and stuff. I was like a plaid shirt and like striped shirt guy until I was like probably like 25. And it was a button down shirt, so I knew I was doing the thing. Nope. Solid colors. Get a solid color button down shirt. Everybody should have one. Honestly, just a classic like white shirt is great. Yeah, that's the next step. All of this kind of just comes through experience, Same thing's true for dates too. I've definitely stopped wearing like flannel on my first dates. I come from like the flannel capital of the world.
I was gonna say easy. I love flannel.
Yeah, man. It's hard to break. I forget that like, I even like brought my friends up to Oregon, and like, we did like a road trip, and they were like, even they point out, they were like, a lot of flannel around here, man. I was like, is this why you always wear the same shirts? I have like 10 of these red flannel shirts. I was like, I don't know, man. That's what I grew up around. I'm used to seeing it. All right, so for women, dress shoes again. Closed-toed is a big deal, apparently. So closed-toed, closed-toe, English language. Dress shoes. Right, that's what we're looking for. Then, socks are obviously optional, depending on like what you're going to be wearing with that. Same thing is true with like your leggings options, right? Now, you can do like a skirt. Skirt or slacks are preferred. If you do a skirt, skirt should be longer than knee length. This is, again, like I mentioned, just really quickly, I just want to get you where my headspace is. Again, normally I have Miriam, our career services director, here to back me up on what to wear. So I'm trying to fly solo today, and I'm not an expert on women's clothing. But that is what we're looking for. I do know that like the big thing I always remember hearing say, right? If you're gonna do a skirt, make sure it goes down below the knees. It's a little more like conservative. Then going up top, belt is optional, depends on, I guess, if it goes with the outfit or not. So belt optional. If there's with skirt situation, but almost mandatory with slacks. So if you're wearing slacks, wear a belt. If you're going with the skirt option, I guess if it goes with the outfit or not. And then up top, like blouse, a simple, solid colored blouse or button down is recommended. Boy, if you were to go back in time and tell my 18-year-old me that I was going to have to do a lecture on what to wear to an interview one day in women's clothing, I would not believe you. In fact, if you were to go back in time and tell me that I would have to tell anybody what to wear, I would not believe you. So that's what we're looking for. Oh, and addressing the heel situation. Don't go high heels, medium to flats. Actually, I need to go back and put that up here as well. Medium heels to flats instead of like high heels. Don't do like a super elevation there. I think that's one that like people bring up a lot actually. Don't do the high heel thing. And I guess it's a situation where when you go like super high heel and you're making yourself like way more taller, that is especially awkward for like the fitness industry. I don't know why, but I've heard it like 2 or 3 times. So medium to nothing is really, I don't know, it's an industry, it's a fitness industry specific thing. I cannot imagine why that's more important to us than other populations out there. But apparently that is something that gets brought up a lot. If makeup is more, and there's your blouse, simple jewelry, that's another one. You don't want to do anything that draws too much attention away from like the conversation. So keep your jewelry simple, simple makeup, and avoid too much perfume. So those are the big things that we're going to look for when it comes to, that's right, jewelry. When it comes to what to wear. Anybody have any questions on any of that? Nope. All right. Good. Because this is the 2 hardest slides in the entire program for me. So color is a really cool tool, by the way. You know, you can use color to make your outfit a little more dynamic, but again, don't go too crazy and like draw away from the actual interview. Try to keep it like solid and simple, right? Okay, so moving on from all the clothing stuff, final preparations. Let's say you're getting ready, you know, you've got your outfit picked up and ready the day before. You know exactly how to get to where you're going. I go back 10 years, I would have said like, you've got your MapQuest directions. You know, you've GPSed it, you know exactly where you're headed. You know how to get there. And it's like the final day before the interview, right? Do a final check for basically everything that we just talked about, right? So final preparations the day before. Okay, so make sure that you have any information about the agency. For instance, like, and this is only if you're going through like a hiring agency, you'll have like an agency information sheet, you know. Probably not going to deal with that specifically too often. However, like, you know, Miriam will often give you like some tips and stuff because we know the people that, you know, she's talked to them on the phone and like, you know, call to be like, hey, we're from Southern California Health Institute. We have a lot of graduates. It says you're looking for personal trainers. I've got a couple people that I'm going to send your way. You know, like, you know, that's her deal. she's already done a little bit of scouting. So a lot of times she's trying to help all you guys out by sending you a little bit of information. So, you know, review that information a little bit before like you go in. Again, it helps you know what to talk about once you get to your interview. You know what they're looking for, right? So review the information gathered on the company you're applying for. Set your resume, cover letter, and reference sheet aside where you can find it. Get your and put all of it in a portfolio. I'm trying to think, is there an actual slide for that? No, there's not. Okay, so this is one thing that you can do, by the way. Put all of those papers in a portfolio. Go to Kinko's, go to Staples, go to the dollar store, and just get yourself a really simple folder, portfolio. Just a real, like, you don't need one of these executive $56, leather-bound BS little notebooks. But if you can just get like a simple little report cover, something like that, to put your resume, put your cover letter in, just really, really simple stuff. Bring that with you. That'll keep your resume, your cover letter, it'll keep all that stuff nice and pristine. And there's just something about showing up with that makes you look super prepared and super professional. Inevitably, one of the biggest mistakes that I think a lot of interviewers make is a lot of times, you're getting hired by like multiple people, right? Like a lot of times, like you've got your direct manager, but like that manager is probably answering to somebody else, and that somebody else, wants to know a little bit about this. Like for instance, like my Sochi interview, I was interviewing for the program director for the personal training department, but Jessica, who's like the dean of the whole school, like she wanted to come in and sit on my interview. And so like one thing that I was able to do is at the time, the guy who was hiring me, his name was Greg, he's sitting there and he's interviewing me, and he's got my resume, and like he's got my cover letter, right there. And he's got my job application, and he's like reviewing those things. He's like, so it says here, blah, 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 right? Well, Jessica comes in, she doesn't have any of that. That happens constantly. Like the second party isn't the one who's like really mainly conducting the interview. So they come in, they don't have any of your paperwork. They don't know anything about you. They're just watching your words. That's where it's like, boom, second copy of my resume right there, brought it with me, right? I kept it in this little portfolio because I'm a super awesome professional looking person. Bam, right? And now that person has something else that they can also reference if they decide to chime in and ask you any questions. And let me tell you guys, that happens constantly. Like the manager, and then like all of a sudden the assistant manager shows up, At the end of the day, assistant manager's not making the decision, right? But they're probably going to talk about you after you leave. And so if you can show a little bit of extra like preparedness there, that's a great way to set yourself apart. You're going to be that person that came in with the portfolio, right? So that's a big one. And then, map out your commute again, so that you do not show up late. All right. So now let's, that's pretty much all the stuff. Honestly, that's going to make most of our notes today. Let's talk a little bit about the different types of interviews, because there are different styles of interviewing that you might run into all of them. So types of interviews you're going to generally see are screening interviews. Everybody's going to go through that. And basically that's like that initial phone call. That phone call is to set up an interview, but it's kind of an interview. Then there's like the panel or board interviews. Those suck, but we'll talk about them. One-on-one interviews, which will be the most common. Conferences, telephones, and then like assessment centers. So your screening interview, right? So actually, I guess we'll put that down here. Types of interviews. So screening is going to be an initial type of interview that that is used to make initial contact with candidates in order to determine who will progress to the later stages of hiring, right? So that screening is like, a lot of times like, you know, it's that phone call that you get like, hi, is this so-and-so? Hi, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so, and walked myself into a corner with that one. And I was just giving you a call because like I got your application from our website. We'd like to bring you in for an interview. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Like, what's your background in fitness and stuff? Like, they already said they're going to bring you in, right? Like, so a lot of times, like people open up with that, right? Or maybe they're going to say, okay, well, we're going to call you within the next few days to set up a time for you to come in, you know? But generally, like the purpose of this initial call is just to like figure out what your availability is and like, can you come in for that actual interview, right? And that's great. But it is like an opportunity for you to kind of talk and get to know. And then like, you know, I always like to try to drop something personal about myself in that phone call that might not be on my resume. And that way, like, I can bring it up again when I get to like my actual interview. And then they go, that's right, you were the guy who was really charming on the phone, hopefully is what they're thinking. You know, that's kind of the idea here, right? So that's your screening, right? It's not a formal like interview in the way that we normally think of it, but it is that initial phone call, and they are, you know, talking to you and thinking about, you know, who you are. So usually conducted via telephone. I guess sometimes it might be like a Skype thing nowadays, but generally it's you know 99 out of 100 times it'll be through the phone. And then there's panel interviews, which suck. Panel interviews are when the candidate is faced with a team of interviewers. So I've only ever been to one of these personally, but basically it's where like multiple people will be set up, and then they're gonna come in. One person's usually like mostly in charge, and then like they'll get things kicked off, but then you might just get like rapid fire questions from anybody on that panel, which, I mean, it's no different than a regular interview. You know, it's like you get a question, you answer that question. You get a question, you answer that question. But there's just something about like very intimidating that really throws anybody off about trying to answer a question to like 3 or 4 people at a time, you know? That can always just be a little intimidating, which is just not sort of what you're looking for. This usually only happens in like places that you're going into that are like a lot of newly opening like franchises. Like that's the situation I was in. Like it was for a boot camp that was like looking to move to LA. That's usually the only time you're gonna really run into like a full panel interview. Then there's one-on-one interviews, which is like the classic. This is probably what most people are thinking of. One-on-one interviews. That should all be bold. So this is going to be where a candidate is meeting with only the hiring manager. What's really great about one-on-one interviews is it really gives you a chance to kind of schmooze. It really gives you a chance to kind of like get on this person's good side and, you know, hopefully be as likable and charming as possible, so that you can kind of win this person over so they think of you when it comes to your, you know, actually like hiring. So this is a good opportunity to build rapport with the interviewer. Remember, like our keys to building rapport, right? We maintain eye contact, we have neutral body language, we ask probing questions. People like to answer specific questions, you know. I know that like interviewers always appreciate it a little bit when you're like, you know, it always ends with that, do you guys have any questions for me? Or do you have any, you do guys, that's how I end every class. Do you have any questions for me? Like anything you're curious about? right? That is not an opportunity for you to ask about salary, by the way. Avoid that question until later. But like, and then also the when do I start? Ugh, ugh. Avoid that one. Avoid any of those cliches. But if you can answer, like one of my favorite ones that I like to ask is like, yeah, like what's the general like type of clientele that you have in a place like this? Like, what is it that people are most interested in? You know, what type of personalities do you have around here? Aside from like the people that you know, not only the people that I work with, you know, that's always a really good question because it shows that like you are considering being here for like the long haul, right? Another one that people really like is like, yeah, what are the advancement opportunities? What does it look like? What's the structure look like if I wanted to like be here for a long time, like for promotions and like moving up the corporate ladder? Like those questions are the type of questions that show that you are invested in this for the long haul. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your capabilities, but I gotta tell you, interviewers, I mean, like interviewing sucks. The times that I've done it, I do not enjoy it at all. It's a huge chunk of your time. And like, I want that process. Oh, I want to hire somebody. I want to keep them for a long time and so that I do not have to hire somebody again. So if you can ask questions that make it appear as if you are going to be there for the long haul, it puts somebody's mind at ease and like gets them excited to hire you. So that's definitely something to ask about. And then telephone interviews, right? Which is really, you know, basically a screening. But sometimes you'll do just an only on phone interview. So used in situations where meeting is not possible. So for instance, like when I applied for jobs up in Portland, but I wasn't able to like go up there in person at first, I had to do like a Skype interview, right? So here's the weird thing. It sounds odd. I'm gonna put that in here. It sounds odd, but during a phone interview, you know, like let's say somebody calls and they're like, you know, like the initial screening is like, hi, is this so-and-so? Yeah, I'd like to give you a call later tonight to maybe do a phone interview, you know? If you know what time it's gonna happen and you have time to prepare, this sounds really weird, but during your phone interview, get dressed up into your professional attire. Definitely you want to do that if it's a Skype call. I mean, obviously you want to look the way you want to look in that Skype call. But it sounds crazy, but like there's something about getting dressed up, and there's also something about like sitting down upright, not like laying on the couch. You know, sitting upright the way you would like during a professional interview. There's something about it that like you can hear it in the inflection, you can hear it in your voice, you know? It's like when you hear somebody say, you guys ever heard this? People can tell on the phone when you're smiling. You know, it's not like they can see you, but there's just something about like the way, there's something under the tone there, you know, that we're picking up on. So nonverbal communication, right? It still exists even on phone interviews. So look for those, right? Establish like that mindset. This is basically like 3 slides on that. They're really trying to get you to take it seriously. So make sure that like, even though you're in your home environment, which is very casual to you, you are treating it very professionally. So dress up, stand up if you have to, or at least sit upright, stand still, use notes. That's kind of nice. Actually like taking notes so that you know exactly what this person's like saying. You maybe like reference stuff back. Although if that taking notes makes you distracted and then like you start to lose the conversation, I definitely don't recommend doing that. And then minimize your distractions. Put the kids in the other room, you know, put the dog outside, all those things before your interview. Actually, I'm gonna put that up here. Minimize distractions, you know, get yourself alone in an empty room. Don't do your phone interview while you're trying to make dinner, you know? Oh, it is up here, okay. And then general considerations. And then this is kind of the last bit, and then there's a bunch of junk slides at the end of this one. So general considerations related to the interview process. Stuff we've already kind of talked a lot about. Arrive early. Although, that being said, don't arrive too early. 5 to 10 minutes. Don't arrive like super early, because that also can kind of be annoying. Cannot tell you how many times I've been like in the middle of a lecture, you know, like it's Sochi, class goes to 1:30, right? And I've set up an interview for like 1:45 or even like 2 o'clock. And like I'll get a text message from somebody at the front desk, and I'll look and it's like, hey, your interview is here. And I'm like, no. It's like, well, they're gonna have to wait because they didn't show up at the time I told them to. I appreciate these showing up early, but like sometimes you can overdo it. Don't go crazy on that. Just make sure that you're there early enough, right? Wait patiently. Maintain eye contact. Don't stare at the center of their forehead, but maintain eye contact. That's a great way to like, you know, build rapport. Firm handshake. Make some small talk. Right, just little things that sort of like start building that rapport, right? It's just a little bit of a small conversation. Doesn't have anything to do with the job. Just shows that you are personable. That's especially good in our industry, right? Again, they're hiring you to work with people and stand around with them an hour at a time. They want to know that you know how to hold a conversation, you know? I mean, most of what we're doing is training people, but like your clients are going to converse with you during that time. So you want to make sure that you can be able to make small talk and then maintain, you know, maintain professionalism the entire time. You know, no matter how casual that person gets, no matter how casual that person gets during the interview, make sure that you are maintaining professionalism. I think that's another West Coast thing. So different types of questions you're going to get during your interviews, right? You're going to get some knowledge-based questions. You're going to get experience-based questions, situational questions. You'll get philosophical questions sometimes. We've all probably had like a 9-to-5 job where you've gotten that silly philosophical question. I remember being so perplexed by this. The first job interview I ever went out for, which was like, you notice Bob stealing a bag of Cheetos from the vending machine. Is Bob in the wrong? And it's like, you're asking me if stealing is, yeah. You know, and he was like, oh, I know, it's kind of just a, you know, the guy was like apologizing for it. He's like, it's just a basic question. You know, some people think a bag of Cheetos is just not that big a deal. And I'm like, well, I mean, we both, and I remember being like, we both know that stealing a bag of Cheetos isn't a big deal, but stealing in general is wrong. That's an easy question to answer. You know, like I remember actually kind of coming off as annoyed during that question when I was like 18. So just, you know, be prepared for stuff like that. You might get that type of question. I think like nowadays, like we're seeing less and less of that, especially in gyms. You know, gyms are hiring adults, you know. But personal questions. So personal questions, you might get them, but they're not going to be like personal related to like your personal life. When they ask like personal questions, they're going to be things like, why do you want this job? Like, what about this job brought you, like, why are you attracted to this job? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, what's your background? What led you to fitness, right? This is a great opportunity. If you have like a really cool story in related to like your personal fitness journey, this is a great place to bring that up. Like if you have lost a lot of weight and now you're looking to do that for others, this is an excellent time to talk about that kind of stuff. Those inspiring stories are always awesome during an interview. If you are like, yeah, I've always been like really active and like worked out, but I started doing like traditional like weightlifting a couple years ago, and now I'm really passionate about it, and I want to like, spread that passion to others. That kind of stuff is great during an interview. That's exactly what people are looking for. They're looking for like, when they ask you about yourself, they want to know about like what makes you tick, what makes you passionate. And then, they might ask you about like what your short-term and long-term goals are, short-term goals are, an opportunity for you to be like, well, I mean, obviously right now I'm trying to like procure employment so that I can build like a client base. Long-term, I'd like to have very regular, steady income with like a large list of clientele where I'm making like a big difference with like a lot of people, I like personal training, but I'd love to see myself in a position where, maybe I'm, hitting larger groups of people someday. That kind of stuff is exactly what they're looking for. They might ask you what, got you interested in personal training. Again, kind of back to what we were talking about. What accomplishments are you like most proud of? Like, that's kind of cool. Again, if you have like already been training somebody and it's like, I had a client who, couldn't go up a flight of stairs when we first started working together because she has really bad like MS, but we started working on her balance for about 6 months. And now, she's got the confidence to go upstairs again. That is huge, right? Like, that's a great story. Greatest strengths, what are you best at? Greatest weaknesses, that dumb question. What do you struggle with? Again, your greatest strengths, I always like to like lean on my knowledge and professionalism. Those are two things that I kind of take seriously. And then like my greatest weaknesses are, again, in the sense that like I try to be as professional as possible. Sometimes, I will, that kind of holds me back from, and I can be like a little stiff sometimes. So I'll bring that up to people. Sometimes I can be a little stiff and maybe impersonal. So, I'll bring that kind of situation up. It's something that isn't like super detrimental, but I'm definitely not doing the backhanded compliment. I'm not being like, I'm too professional. Like I'm not saying anything like that. I'm like, oh, I'm way too punctual. That's like being like, I'm too handsome. Like, don't try that technique. Everybody sees right through it. I'm just too dedicated to my clients. Yeah, none of that. So sometimes you might get philosophical questions. Again, is stealing a bag of Cheetos wrong? Yeah, sure, of course. They're going to see if your philosophy matches the organization. That's an example of a philosophical question. More commonly, philosophical questions that you're going to get are like, what's your philosophy on like fitness, right? Like, what's your philosophy on like sports? That's the kind of stuff. Like, what does good customer service mean to you, right? How do you provide like uncompromised customer service? That's the kind of stuff we're looking for. So like philosophical questions like that, how do you inspire people? Knowledge-based questions. These are always really fun, actually, and you guys are gonna nail these. This is the big one that like, so I've had people come back out, graduates who have gotten hired and stuff. They've come back and they're like, oh man, like I crushed my interview. They were all knowledge questions and I killed it. They might say like, hey, your client, what would you do for a client who has like really bad osteoporosis? And you'd be like, glad you asked. And it's like, I would focus a little more on high intensity, but obviously like keep them safe. We'd focus a lot on like spinal and core work because a lot of times those are places that lose bone density. We're going to work a lot on the legs because we want to strengthen the femur. Want to increase that bone density through weight bearing exercises. Boom, 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 right? Like knowledge questions are the ones that Sochi students have no problem with. So you might get questions like that. Experience questions, they might ask you like, hey, do you have any experience in sales? Do you have experience with operating like a POS system, like a point of sales system? Answer that stuff honestly. Like, it's okay if you don't have certain types of experience. Like, answer honestly. And again, that just shows that like you have awareness of the fact like, yeah, no, I don't have a lot of experience operating whatever software your company uses, but I'm pretty good with computers. Okay, great. Like, that'll mean it'll be easy to teach, don't try to like BS your way through stuff like that and be like, no, I haven't operated that, but I use this other thing that's pretty similar. How do you know it's similar? That's a trap. Don't fall for that trap. That's your experience-based questions. Like, you might not have like a lot of that traditional experience. That's okay. Because you do have, like I said, you have plenty of the knowledge, and that's really what you're going to kind of lean on. Then you got situational questions that'll only come up in like this specific workplace. Like, hey, how do you deal with like, I'm going to give you a scenario, answer it to the best of your ability. Your client sends you a text message 20 minutes before your session's supposed to start saying, hey, my car won't start. what do you do? Do you charge that person because they didn't give you 24 hours notice, or do you decide to give them leeway? And honestly, a lot of times what people kind of think of is they're like, oh, I get it. This is a really corporate place. They definitely want me to charge them because that's the policy. Answer it honestly, answer the way you would. Which if it were me, I'd be like, well, I would definitely consider how long I've been working with this client. They're brand new. And this is their first time. I'm probably still going to charge them, if they're brand new, because I don't really know whether or not this person actually does show up on time. Yeah, I'll charge them. They knew the policy. I explained it to them when they signed up. But if they're a client that I've been working with for a really long time, they're a regular of mine, and they never show up late, and they legitimately have car issues, and part of me having this client for a long time is keeping their loyalty, I'll probably be a little more lenient. I think it's going to depend. That's a really honest answer to that question, right? And that's literally how I consider things. I normally have a pretty good, I also usually use a 3-strike policy, if you never show up on time, honestly, if you never show up on time at this point, I've only got so much room in my schedule. I'll probably just fire you, I drop clients like that if it's not working, which is the luxury of having lots of clients, which I actually don't have lots of clients anymore, but I just have a very full schedule at this point. But the more clients you have, guys, I'm straying outside of interview stuff right here, but this is a general piece of advice. If you do get to a position where you have plenty of clients and you are just having this one person who's always argumentative, maybe doesn't work hard and just never shows up on time, give them to another trainer, get rid of them. You don't have to keep your clients forever. That is not your responsibility. It's a two-way street, Sorry, that was definitely not interview information, but I know that's something that a lot of newbies kind of struggle with, is being afraid of the customer's always right and you have to train somebody forever. Nope. If your client doesn't show up on time all the time, and they are taken away from your ability to make more money or your ability to help more people because they are a gap in your schedule, get rid of them. There's nothing wrong with that. That'll be our weird off target PSA for the day. So those are your situational questions. If you're, sometimes you'll see things let's see here. These are all so not specific. These are all recreation industry. This is the garbage slides at the end. Yeah, here we go. This is, again, philosophical. You heard that one of your part-time staff persons is stealing supplies. What do you do, right? Obviously, you're going to say something I would confront that person and then report it to a superior, right? That's what they're looking for. So moving on from there, you will also sometimes get think on your feet questions. These are kind of the weird ones. There are no real right or wrong answers here. A lot of times they're just fun little questions to kind of break the ice. But you'll get these really weird questions if you were an animal, what animal would you be? I hate questions like this in interviews. I've been all super prepared to be in super professional mode, and then I come in here and I get if you were who's your favorite cartoon character? Inevitably you get something because they're just trying to get your personality to shine through. They just want to know a little bit about who it is they're working with. I get it. Personally though, I really hate this type of question. But if you do get these questions, just remember there's no real right or wrong answer. It's probably going to throw you for a loop. I never see these coming whenever you get these questions. It's compare yourself to a thumbtack. So little weird things like that. I had one guy who just was what's the most interesting fact you learned recently? And I was it's me. I'm constantly learning dumb trivia, weird little facts. But my brain was just wasn't ready for something like that. I remember just being so just be prepared for those. But remember, the best thing you can do if you get a question like that is don't let it derail you. There's no wrong or right answer on these, so just don't let it freak you out. Oh God, there's more. If you could only have one office supply, what would it be? Oh my God. If you were stuck on a deserted island, what would you bring? I think I saw that on like I had somebody ask me that on a date like once or something. I was like, if you're on a deserted island, what would you bring? And I was like, a guide for how to survive on a deserted island, which was a boring answer apparently. And then lastly, you're gonna get closing questions, like little questions like usually the number one closing question you're gonna get is like, do you have any questions for me? Right? Like they're just gonna ask you like, do you have anything in return? Again, try to come up with something. Like those questions are a great way to build rapport and show that you're serious about the job. Why should we hire you? That question also sucks. That's my second least favorite question when it comes to interviews. Why should we hire you? And it's like, again, don't just say something like, because I'm the best candidate. Obviously, that is true, but like you don't want to say that in your interview. You know, you want to say something along the lines of like, well, I think that like my passions are going to be like what pays off in the end, or my professionalism is going to be something that will last a long time as I stay here. I'm looking for something really solid. You know, any of those things are kind of good answers to those questions. Questions for an interviewer, like that last one, right? Do you have any final questions? Is there anything else you'd like to tell me? Any questions you have for me? Those questions for the interviewer. You're the interviewee, right? Now is your chance to turn it around and ask them. Never pass up the opportunity to ask like a question. It shows like a lack of interest. So get a chance to say, okay, you know, like what does the schedule look like? How often do you update the schedule? That's a really good one, actually. Like, how often does my schedule come out? I mean, if you're working like, if it's a personal training job, like literally a personal training job, you're not getting like a unique schedule. But if it's like a group exercise situation, you know, how far in advance do we get notice about like when like what classes we're going to be teaching? That's a great question up front, because it shows that it's like, look, I'm a working professional. Like I've got a lot of other things going on as well, and I want to fit this into my schedule effectively. I want to start thinking about it now so that I'm prepared, right? It's just showing that you're forward thinking and professional. But again, I've said it a million times, but don't ask about salary. That's just not where this comes up. Could you tell me a little bit about the typical schedule, right? That's a really good one. Again, I mentioned it earlier. What does the advancement in this company look like? That's a really great question. What process is used to evaluate employee performance? That's a really good one. Oh, and this is always a good one. Starting date for the position and time frame for when you're gonna like when they're gonna let you know whether or not you got the job. Most good interviewers are going to bring that up on their own, so you won't have to ask. But it's a great question. You do want to know, like, if I do get the job, when are you going to let me know? Like, is it within the next week, 2 weeks? Like, what does that look like? How much longer are you doing interviews for? You know, those little things. Like, again, it just shows that like you are in charge of your schedule. All right, last little bit here. Illegal questions. They are not allowed to ask you anything about religion, ethnicity, citizenship, marital status, family status, physical appearance, health, disabilities, criminal record, any of that stuff, military record, all of it. None of that is allowed, especially in California. So it is not allowed anywhere, but it is super not allowed in California. Any of like your affiliations with anything that's like not professional, totally unrelated questions. They are not allowed to ask you that stuff. So if they do ask you any of those questions, first off, they shouldn't, and it is literally against the law. But if they do, you don't have to answer, right? And if they, you know, and if they shouldn't ask you those questions, so it shouldn't come up. So if they do refuse to answer, that doesn't show that like you're being unprofessional or anything. I know that like a lot of times we think that interviews are meant to be like kissing the interviewer's butt, because we're just trying to make as good an impression as possible. But if they ask you something crazy, like what is your religious affiliation, that is insane. Do not answer that question. Yeah, and like the intention behind that is just silly. So after your interview is over, last little bit here. I forgot about this. Last little bit, send a thank you note. They're saying like thank you letter here. Again, it's 2020. I think the letter has died. you know. At this point, like we're just not seeing that. But and don't make a thank you call or anything like that. That's a little bit like over the top. But just sending a follow-up letter, like a thank you email, is excellent. That is a great thing you can do. Yeah, this person probably called you. Do not send a thank you text. I've gotten a few of those, and I think that's very weird. Like they texted the number. They didn't know if that was my personal number. They didn't know if that was my business number, but they sent a text message anyway. I don't recommend doing that. I just think it's a little bit blurring the lines. I know nowadays it's like actually, this is another little tangent just before we end today. This is a small little tangent. I have talked to students who have gone out for interviews after like, we'll do like a job fair or something. And the manager will text them and be like, hey, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so. We'd like to bring you in for an interview. Now, I get it. It's 2020. Texting is like a really common thing nowadays. I think that is a little unprofessional and a little weird. Now, it could be fine, but do you remember a couple days ago, I was talking about how, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people might not like certain, this was in the evening class. So there's a lot of times you'll hear somebody who might have worked somewhere and they hated working there. They were like, hey, I didn't like working there. A lot of times, like, it's not really the big company's fault. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong, like corporate's boring. You're a number in a system. You're not a person, you know? And so corporate is not exactly like pleasant, but like, is it actually treating you poorly? Probably not. It's just treating you nothing, you know? But your manager makes all the difference, you know? And a lot of times the managers in a lot of gyms were really great trainers and know nothing about managing. So if you get a text message from somebody who's thinking about hiring you, which I think is a very weird thing, hey, maybe consider going out on that interview, but it also might be a thing where you consider maybe this person isn't the type of person I really want to work for, you know? So the same thing is true on the other direction. Don't send a text message to your potential employers, even if it is just a, hey, thanks for bringing me in today. That was really great. Something you want to avoid. But thank you letters, those are great, you know? Just sending a quick little email of, hi, this is Brad Thompson. Thank you so much for bringing me in today. I had a really good time. Hope to hear from you soon. Simple, to the point, you know, just shows that like you're doing a follow-up, you know? So if you are invited back for a second interview, you know, again, all of that same process is going to go. Bring your resume again, bring your cover letter again. Typically, this is also where in a second interview, you want to dress business casual, but bring like a change, like make sure that you have like a change like of like shorts, leggings, athletic shoes, and like an athletic top in the car. In case you actually do like a practical interview, because that's another really common thing in our industry. A lot of times, like they'll say, I want you to, you know, I'm going to bring you in for a training session. You're going to train me for an hour, you know, or maybe not a full hour. Usually they'll do like 20-minute demos. But make sure that you have a change of clothes to that second interview. That is something that's big for our industry. In summary, the real big thing today, I think that we kind of the big common thing we kept coming back to is just to be prepared for everything. You know, try to know what the questions are, prepare the correct clothing, be professional, and try to answer those questions honestly and openly as you can. And that's about it, guys. How you guys feeling? Questions? Remember, you should have questions for me. No, I'm kidding.
Nope, all good.
All right. Well, that is about it. By the way, you guys missed out. I thought about doing it, but I thought it'd be even weirder over a Zoom call. Normally, this is the day that I actually just randomly show up and don't tell anybody in like business casual, which always freaks everybody out. Everyone's like, so we didn't know you owned pants. I love doing that, just randomly. I also get a bunch of crap from all my coworkers who are like, "Oh, look at you."
Should have just done it for the call right now.
What's that?
You should have just wore the suit for the video now.
I was this close, man. Like I literally, like I even pulled like my button down out of the closet, and I was like, and I like put it back. Mostly because like, I mean, I'm gonna level with you guys. I don't shower before these calls. Like I get up and work out, and then like, you know, go eat breakfast, and then I do these calls, and then I shower afterwards. So that's the total honesty here.
So
we really needed
that. Right. So usually when you go in for these interviews, are they a single person that's going to be interviewing you, or do they have like a panel?
9 out of 10 times it'll be a single person. Actually, that's not true. 5 out of 10 times it'll be a single person. The other like 4 out of the 10, you know, total of 9, it'll be 1 or 2 people. Sometimes like an assistant manager will show up.
Okay.
Or actually, you know what? Less common than the assistant manager, it'll usually be like the GM. So it'll be like you're getting hired by like the training manager, but that training manager answers to like the operations like general manager. And they'll usually like pop their head in for just a second because they're always interested in that process, you know?
Okay.
But rarely will it be anybody else. Like the sales manager is totally not your department. You know, they're doing membership sales, not training sales. So usually 1 or 2.
I went for, this was like last year, I went for an interview for Crunch and UFC, and it was just a single guy, and then he did the interview, but he basically like used sales in the interview.
Oh, really?
He's like, so do any of you guys want to purchase the membership today? And I was like, what? I was like, I thought I was getting interviewed, not being led into a sale.
That's what I'm talking about, man. Like, how did that guy become a manager? That is the Michael Scott of gyms. Like, yeah, he was probably a really great salesman, nailed it on his numbers. Somebody at corporate saw his name pop up and was like, make that guy a manager. And now you're stuck with somebody who has no leadership skills.
Yeah. I thought that was really weird. I was like, I thought I was here for an interview, not for me to be sold on the gym. Plus,
I hate to say it, but that's so common in our industry. I mean, I'm honestly a pretty good example of that. I don't have like a ton of experience interviewing people, and I was thrown into like, they were like, hey, you know how to teach. Now we're gonna make you, hire other teachers. And I was like, I don't know how to conduct like a lecture interview, like what a mock lecture is supposed to look like. Like I know what a regular interview is, but like this is not something I like have a lot of experience with. And my first few interviews was just like me all by myself. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I can't get one other staff member in here to help me, I think people just get like thrust into those positions they're not great at. And it's so common in gyms. That's why, again, we're going to get in on Monday. We're starting to talk about how to work for yourself. And, that is about like either opening your own gym or having your own private training business. Or, just being an independent contractor, going around to people's houses. That skill set that we're going to talk about on Monday, I think that mentality still very much applies to regular gyms as well. Like if you are working in a place like 24, don't get me wrong, you should absolutely try to be an ideal employee. Be the best employee that you can be. But at the same time, you are a number in a system. So like it is okay to treat yourself as if you are just a number in a system. Show up to work, show up on time, do your work, get out of there, and go, work on like developing yourself during that time. Don't get sucked in there just hanging around doing nothing that doesn't serve you, That's very selfish sounding, but hey, that's what that style of corporate gym stuff, that's what that life is like, Like I said, when I worked at LA Fitness, there was constantly times where it was like, my manager would be like, hey, can you do us a favor? Can you help like clean up the gym real quick? Just go do like, you done for the day? I'd be like, yeah, I'm done for the day. It's like, can you just take 5 minutes and like do a quick circle around the gym? And I was like, you know what? I got places to be. I knew this was my last appointment. I'm out. I didn't do it once. I mean that quite literally. It's something that I'm actually super, super proud of. I did not pick up a dumbbell one time that I wasn't paid for it. Now, when my clients would cancel, I would occasionally use that time because I was getting paid. to like clean the gym up because I didn't have anything better to do, and I had another appointment showing up. I'd be like, hey, where are you? 20 minutes into the time, and they'd be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I overslept, I'm not gonna make it today. And so like, I've been waiting for 20 minutes. There's not that much time before my next session. I'm getting paid either way. Yeah, I'd clean up the gym, of course. Because it makes my life easier. But like, if there was ever like just a favor that I wasn't getting paid for at a place that was like corporate, no way, no favors. That's not selfish. That's smart.
Yeah.
So, all right. I'm gonna go ahead and end the recording. See y'all on Monday, not tomorrow.